Russia is so big that it has 11 time zones. When the sun rises in Moscow, it's setting in Vladivostok. Even so, it never became an empire on which the sun never sets, no matter how hard it tried. Why? Because size isn't everything. Sometimes being big actually brings trouble. Vladimir Putin once said that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. For the wider global community, this probably raised a few chuckles when they heard it, but it was no laughing matter for the people closer to Russia. They know better than anyone that Russia wants to be big. No, it needs to be big. Moscow sees it as a matter of survival. Russia's vast size isn't an accident. The country expanded rapidly between the 16th and 19th centuries. This didn't start as an imperial project, it was more of an act of desperation, a reaction to the ghosts of the past. The Mongols and the Tatars once ruled Russia with an iron fist. Russians remembered these medieval invasions and tried to acquire natural borders to prevent them from happening again. Unfortunately, easily defensible borders are very hard to come by in this part of the world. Sure, there's the Ural Mountains, which were annexed by 1574, but they didn't help at all in the west. While the Tsardom of Russia was colonizing the Urals, it was also involved in the Livonian War, and that was a disaster. Russia fought for its life against European powers like Sweden, Denmark, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, while another army of Ottomans and Tatars from Crimea made it all the way to Moscow and started a fire. The city survived, but a generation later, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth said, "My turn." It invaded Russia, and since there was little to stop it, it occupied Moscow too. If you're wondering why Putin said something so absurd, you're starting to get a glimpse into the reasons why. Superpowers tend to be blessed by geography. Britain might be a small island, but it was the center of a world empire in large part because it was hard to invade. After all, it's an island, and it had the Royal Navy on patrol. The United States went from a British colony to a superpower in large part because it has the benefit of being separated from other great powers by 2 oceans. Russia doesn't have much at all to defend it. Take out a map of Europe, and you might notice something that will tell you why Putin's invasion of Ukraine is a complete failure. Most of the continent of Europe is a vast, level plain that stretches from the Pyrenees to the Urals. The further east you go, the wider the plain gets. At the Urals, the plain stretches for over 1,200 miles, 1,931 kilometers, from the Arctic Ocean to the Caspian Sea. It's a place that's good for the movement of huge armies and pretty much impossible to defend. Russia knows that all too well. For centuries, it tried to reverse that situation, and by the Cold War, it had to a large extent. The Soviet Union stretched all the way to Berlin, far to the west in the European plain, where it was a lot narrower. It could concentrate numerically superior forces there, and if it came down to a war, overwhelm its enemies. NATO countries feared this prospect for decades. It influenced everything the alliance did. Western tanks were designed to have the range and durability to destroy more than one Soviet tank. Even stealth technology was born in large part because of this geographical situation. The F-22 Raptor started its life in the 1980s. To ensure that the United States would not lose an advantage in the skies over Europe, it absolutely could not afford to, lest the Soviet tank columns come in wave after unstoppable wave. But then, the Berlin Wall fell, and in the space of just 2 years, those gains that had taken centuries and countless lives for Russia to achieve were all gone. Russia retreated far back to the east, where the plain was vast and wide again. Such was the end of Putin's historical Russia, even though historically, Russia had to go to war to get all of this territory. So, Putin went to war again for it, just with a lot less success than the Tsars and Soviet dictators who preceded him. In June of 2025, Russian casualties in what was supposed to be a brief special military operation hit the 1 million mark. What has Putin gotten for such a price? Between the start of the invasion and July 9th of 2025, Russia has seen a net gain of almost 28,000 square miles, 72,500 square kilometers, about half the size of the US state of New York. That week, it only gained an additional 18 square miles, 47 square kilometers. Russia controls about 20% of Ukraine, the eastern 20%, where the European plain is wider and harder to defend. But it gets worse. Before the war, Russia's border with NATO was 754 miles. 1,213 kilometers. Putin wanted to reduce that vulnerability by forcing Ukraine back into Moscow's orbit. That would bring Russia further west along the European plain. But alas, his plan only wound up bringing Finland into the alliance and increasing the total border he has to defend by an additional 830 miles, 1,300 kilometers. That means more money spent on the armed forces so they can defend this long stretch of open territory, even when the war is over. The gains in Ukraine simply won't be significant enough to undo the deterioration in Russia's geographic position thanks to a strengthened NATO. But Putin, and probably whatever dictator comes after him, felt a strong historical compulsion. As long as Russia follows the tradition of Peter the Great and aspires to superpower status, it needs more easily defensible borders, and we haven't gotten into the strongest reason why yet. Look at a map of Russia and divide it through the Urals. Over 3/4 of Russia's territory is east of that line, but 80% of the population is to the west of it. The most vulnerable areas of Russia also have by far the most value. Any disruption to this part of the country would bring devastating consequences. Unfortunately for Moscow, its territory west of the Urals is just as vulnerable now as it was in the time of the Mongols and Tatars. Russia might have 11 time zones, but not all of them are created equal. Most of the things that matter are right here. The cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg alone have a combined 17 million people, about 12% of Russia's population. Most of Russia's problems today are in the west, but expanding so far east of the Urals brought problems too. Russia was originally lured there when it realized there was something valuable to go around. But everything has a price. It gets really cold in Siberia. The average daily high temperature for the year is 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius. The winters are especially harsh. In January, the average daily high doesn't even get into positive territory on the thermometer. Little wonder why the population density out here is only about 3 people to a square kilometer. So why did Russia even bother expanding here? Such cold temperatures mean animals with thick furs, like Arctic foxes and even tigers. Russian traders soon realized that the fur from these animals could be sold at an enormous profit in Europe. The fur industry back then was what the energy industry is for Russia today, the economic engine that provided the wealth for its war machine and the luxury of its rulers. So Russian traders poured over the Urals and armies soon followed. The tribes in the region had little chance against Russian gunpowder, so they were forced into a coercive arrangement. Russian trading posts were set up in Siberia. The locals would then come to pay regular fur tributes. Otherwise, they had little connection with Moscow, the wider Russian society, or each other. That's still the case. Take out another map of Russia and look at its network of roads. You'll notice something peculiar. Russia's European heartland west of the Urals is well connected. There's a sprawling network centered on Moscow. The situation is a lot different in the east. With few exceptions, the Siberian districts are isolated from each other. The major road network is the Trans-Siberian Highway. Conveniently, this road helps Moscow to maintain its control of Siberia, but control isn't the same as development. The Trans-Siberian Highway is the world's third longest road. It stretches 6,800 miles, nearly 11,000 kilometers from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. But if you think that traveling along it is as simple as taking a ride along I-95 on the east coast of the United States, you better think again. Sure, the entire highway is paved with asphalt and concrete, but that doesn't mean all parts are in the same condition. As you might expect, the highway is usually in good shape in Russia's European heartland. Move east of the Urals, though, and your trip will get a lot more challenging, especially during a certain time of year. And it's not the one you think. If you have good heating for the interior of your car, the Siberian winter probably won't be as much of a challenge as you feared. At least, not on this road. But if you're traveling in the summer, look out. Siberian summers are kind of normal, with temperatures reaching average highs of about 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 23.8 Celsius in July. But there's a catch. It can get rainy during the summer months. Just over 4 pints, 2 liters of water fall on 11 square feet, 1 square meter per day on average. It's slightly more in August. That might not sound like a lot. New York City actually gets significantly more rain in the summer. It's just that the United States can take much better care of its infrastructure. The road is often badly paved east of the Urals, so when the rains come, a lot of it becomes quagmire. The Russian authorities simply don't have the resources to keep it in the condition it needs to be kept in. The sheer distances involved are just too much to handle. It doesn't help that parts of it can go through challenging terrain like forests or tundra. And don't expect to find many accommodations along your journey. Remember, there's only an average of 3 people per square kilometer in Siberia. Opening an inn along this route is something only the most daring entrepreneurs would probably try. You'll more likely be sleeping in your car or going camping, where you can expect to find plenty of mosquitoes to keep you company in those fleeting times of warmth out here. It might not surprise you to hear that travel guides advise would-be drivers to prepare for the worst and to never drive along the Trans-Siberian Highway alone. If your car suffers from mechanical problems or there's some other kind of emergency, you could be many miles indeed from help. Drivers always need to remember the scales involved out here. The distance from Irkutsk to Khabarovsk, 2 of the larger cities along just the eastern part of the highway, is still greater than the distance between New York and Dallas, Texas. And remember, the Trans-Siberian Highway is the best road out here. The local roads are in much worse condition. They're usually not paved, and the paved ones are often full of potholes. The lack of infrastructure means that some towns in Siberia are inaccessible for most of the year. 10% of the Russian population gets completely cut off from the rest of the country for days or even weeks. Take Chersky in the Sakha Republic. Winter temperatures here can go as low as minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 below Celsius. It's nowhere near the Trans-Siberian Highway, so it's isolated, buried under ice and snow for 8 months. That's sort of by design. The place was founded in 1931 as part of Stalin's network of gulags. At its peak, the town had a population of about 12,000, but understandably, the vast majority left after the Soviet Union collapsed. Nearly 2,900 remained by the time of the 2010 Russian census. Chersky is a fairly typical case when it comes to Siberian towns, especially if they're north of the Arctic Circle. These towns are often situated in tundra. Trucks can bring in supplies when the rivers freeze, but you won't be surprised to hear that these journeys can be long and dangerous. The road trip, if you can call it that, from Yakutsk, the region's largest city, to Chersky, is just under 1,200 miles, 1,900 kilometers, and takes a week. Even a flight by turboprop takes 4.5 hours. Even all these centuries later, Russia still hasn't developed the necessary infrastructure to connect Siberia to the Russian heartland. And that's partly by design. It helps when Moscow finds a need to exploit the locals for its ambitions. The people in Siberia have been the first to die in Ukraine, so that the people in Russia's major heartland cities need not. But this treatment of the locals is a double-edged sword. Paying so little attention to the people and infrastructure out here means that the Russian economy is stuck in second gear. Siberia brings up a fantastic paradox for life in modern Russia. How is one of the world's most fantastically rich places so poor? The numbers don't lie. Russia is the world's most resource-rich country. Investors value its natural resources at a whopping $75 trillion. Even the United States only comes in at a distant second with $45 trillion worth of natural resources. Russia has the world's largest proven natural gas reserves at 1.32 quadrillion cubic feet in 2020 alone. Good for 20% of the global total. It has about 80 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, making it the world's 8th largest in that category. But it has much more to offer than that. Its natural resources are extraordinarily diverse. Russia is like a phrase out of Greek myth. It is literally rich in gold. It produced 322 tons in 2023, second behind China, and consumed only 71 of them. There's plenty to go with the gold, too. The Russian Far East alone has silver, timber, iron ore, lead, and zinc. It also has over 543 million acres, 220 million hectares of farmland. That's important because aside from energy, agricultural products are Russia's second biggest export. And if you think Russia isn't blessed with the materials needed for the modern digital economy, think again. The US Geological Survey estimates that Russia has 3.8 million metric tons of rare earth metals. Its reserves are the world's 5th largest. Russia's Natural Resources Ministry says the stockpile is much bigger than that, 28.7 million tons for whatever that's worth. We wouldn't blame you if you didn't think it was worth much. Either way, the metals aren't of one type, but come in a wide variety. There's lithium for batteries, gallium for semiconductors, and beryllium for aircraft, spacecraft, and even potential nuclear fusion reactors, just to name a few. Yakutia alone has at least 1.7 million tons of rare earth material at its Tomtor deposit. But despite this fantastic wealth, Russia's economy is only the world's 11th largest. That sounds big, but with such resources to call on, why isn't it bigger? As you might have figured out by now, the roads are one of the most frequent items of complaint by locals in Russia. There's a good reason for those complaints. Russia's roads can be downright dangerous. In 2023, 14,700 people died in traffic accidents. That sounds like a lot less than the nearly 41,000 deaths in the United States that year, but when you consider that there are 243 million licensed drivers in the US and only 72.5 million in Russia, the accidents stand out a lot more. Once again, the numbers don't lie. About 0.01% of American drivers died in accidents in 2023, twice as many of Russia's drivers did. Goldman Sachs once ranked Russia's road network 130th out of 142 in the world. That was a few years ago, but since the Russian government spends 40% of its budget on the military these days, the situation probably hasn't changed much. If anything, it's gotten worse, and this time at least, it isn't just limited to Siberia. Siberia might have the biggest problem, but roads in the heartland are frequently congested because of bad conditions. Even the route between Moscow and St. Petersburg isn't equipped to handle traffic from heavy trucks. So it raises another paradox. How is Russia supposed to become a rare earth powerhouse if it can't ship the people, equipment, and goods around its vast interior? Before the war, the Russian Ministry of Transport estimated that Russia lost between 7 and 9% of its GDP every year due to poor roads. Why doesn't Russia try everything it can to improve the roads, then? Well, it's not so simple. The harsh climate obviously works heavily against such efforts. Then there's the corruption. Corruption has always been one of the major reasons why Russia has never been as successful as its dictators wanted it to be. It's no different now. Improvements to a country's infrastructure take a lot of investment, and with so much money sloshing around, don't be surprised to hear that corrupt officials are going after it. The Ruski Bridge, once the world's longest suspension bridge, measures in at around 3,900 feet, almost 1,200 meters, and connects Vladivostok to Ruski Island. It was finished in 2012, and then Prime Minister Medvedev hailed it as a symbol of Russian engineering. There's just one problem. It's sort of Russia's version of a bridge to nowhere. Ruski Island only has 5,000 inhabitants, and the bridge cost $1.1 billion to build. This is just one example. Monitors estimate that 70% of investments in road projects are lost because of corruption. The local contractors who are supposed to work on the roads pay politicians to get their jobs. The money that's left over is then used to build the road. The locals then get to complain about the obstacle course of potholes they need to navigate. Like many taxi drivers across the world, Russian cabbies like to make small talk with their foreign passengers, but they don't talk about the weather. Or even what you think of Moscow. Instead, they ask, "What do you think about our Russian roads?" And no matter what answer the passenger gives, they'll be met with the same response. Because in Russia, complaining about the roads is practically a national pastime. Over 90% of the population agrees. The roads are awful. Russia's infrastructure investments have been inadequate and misplaced, but even if things were above board and completely done, it would still have an almost unsolvable problem. The country is just too big. Even the United States has a lot of problems maintaining its infrastructure. That's in large part because there's so much to maintain. It's the world's third largest country with 4 different time zones in its continental mass. But Russia is almost twice as big, with far more formidable terrain. It gets colder, and shipping things over such vast distances in harsh locales will by its nature be risky. Imagine trying to insure something like a rare earth deposit that took millions to get out of the ground, only knowing that it will need to travel through the harsh Siberian winter for thousands of miles. Even if Russia's rail and road networks were perfectly maintained and world-class, products would still have to cross all of this space. It's sort of the same problem that China once faced. The Silk Road was the center of world trade, stretching all the way to Western Europe. But even if you cut out all the middlemen and the bandits along the way, as the Mongols sort of once did, the route was just too long and harrowing to travel on. Economic growth was always limited by that geographical space. That's why, as soon as alternatives opened, the sea routes that Europeans started to discover in the late 15th century, the Silk Road quickly went by the wayside. Xi Jinping is desperately trying to revive it, but he's having about as much success as his buddy to the north. This story brings up another curious paradox. In theory, Russia shouldn't need to be limited by its treacherous overland routes. It has almost 24,000 miles, 38,600 kilometers of coastline, good for fifth in the world. But not all coastline is created equal. Russia isn't taking advantage of its coastline. When it comes to container port traffic, the World Bank says that China is ranked first with almost 269 million 20-foot, 6-meter equivalent units in 2022, a term that refers to a standard-sized shipping container. The United States ranked a distant second with 62.2 million. Where was Russia? Not in the top 10. Try 36th. That's even lower than tiny countries like Belgium. Singapore, ranked third in the country, has ports that get almost 10 times the container traffic that Russia does. It turns out there's a reason for this, too. Russia's ports aren't all that good, and it's not necessarily because of incompetence or corruption. At least that can theoretically be fixed, but there's something else that can't. Take a look at where Russia's coastline actually is. The vast majority of it is along the country's north, and over half of Russia's territory is above the 60th degree north latitude. Russia's stretches account for over 53% of the total coastline of the Arctic Ocean. What's the constant companion you can expect to find up here? The answer is obvious. Almost all of Russia's ports are icy for large parts of the year. There's a way around this, icebreakers, and Russia has a lot of them. Its fleet counts 57 icebreaker ships, more than any other country. Canada comes in at a distant second with 18. 8 of Russia's icebreakers are nuclear-powered, which means they can stay at sea for months at a time, breaking ice and helping Russian commerce. The United States, which only has 5 icebreakers, has begun to see Russia's icebreaker fleet as a problem. The entire NATO alliance only has 47, so it's entered into a pact with NATO allies to ensure that Russia can't gain complete superiority in the Arctic. They envision building a combined fleet of 90 icebreakers. But there's a reason the United States has neglected its icebreaker fleet. It simply hasn't needed such expensive ships. Its ports don't freeze over for long. They're always open for business. Russia would swap places in a heartbeat if it could. Russia has only a few warm water ports. Right now, these include Sevastopol in occupied Crimea and Novorossiysk on the Black Sea. But they're not ideal. They sit behind the Bosphorus and Dardanelles that its historical rival Turkey controls. The rivalry played out again a few days after the invasion when the Turks announced they would not let Russian naval vessels pass through the straits. If worse came to worst, the Turks could block Russia's access to the Mediterranean at any time. Peter the Great and Russian dictators after him spent a lot of blood and treasure over generations of war against the Ottoman Turks to secure footholds on the Black Sea, and yet Turkey still has the geographical advantage. So Russia expanded elsewhere to look for more warm water ports. There's Kaliningrad, but it has a problem too. Instead of being behind the Turkish choke points, this one's behind choke points that other old enemies, Denmark and Sweden, can easily control, especially now with America's help. Sweden is refortifying the island of Gotland, which is only 214 miles, 345 kilometers away from Kaliningrad. It's already being called NATO's aircraft carrier in the Baltic. And then, even if Russian ships were able to get through the choke points here unscathed, they would still need to go through the English Channel and all of NATO's naval assets there. In earlier times, they would have had to deal with the might of the Royal Navy, so Kaliningrad isn't a solution for Russia's Black Sea woes. Russia's geography provides a way out, though. Sort of. Surprisingly, the port of Murmansk usually doesn't freeze over in the winter despite its high northern latitude. That's thanks to the warm current of the jet stream coming out of the Gulf of America, formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico. But not so fast. Take a look at where Murmansk is. To get from Murmansk to the open ocean, Russian ships need to go through the GIUK Gap, the two straits between Greenland and Iceland and the United Kingdom. The Royal Navy has a lot of experience patrolling these waters in living memory. During the Cold War, it specialized in the area. It was even worse for Imperial Russia when the Royal Navy ruled the world's waves. Russia's lack of open ocean warm water ports in its European heartland gave it another reason to continue expanding east past the Urals, all the way to the Pacific and even into North America. What did it get for these efforts? First, consider the port of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky on the Kamchatka Peninsula. Surprisingly, it doesn't freeze over. Unfortunately for Russia, it's still not all that good. Kamchatka can't be connected to the Russian mainland by road or rail. The terrain is just too forbidding. So Russia continued looking throughout the vast Eurasian continent for a warm water port that wasn't behind potentially hostile checkpoints. Vladivostok was a major aim. Finally securing it from China in the 19th century was a major victory. Unfortunately for Russia, it's still not good enough. Back then, it used to freeze for 4 months in the year. It doesn't have the benefit of the Gulf Stream and is near the polar temperatures that freeze Siberia over between November and March. The climate is warmer now, so the port doesn't get as much ice these days, but there's another problem. To get from Vladivostok to the open ocean, Russian ships need to cross through checkpoints in the Sea of Japan. That's bad news for Moscow. Vladivostok wasn't satisfactory for Russia, so it tried to control Port Arthur, now the Lushunko district in Dalian, China. It didn't freeze over in the winter. Sure, it's still isolated from the open ocean, but better to go through the Yellow Sea and the Chinese coastline than the Sea of Japan, right? Japan didn't think so, which helped to lead to the Russo-Japanese War. Russia and Japan have more or less been at odds ever since. Russia wasn't able to hold on to Port Arthur. Japan took it in the war. The Soviet Union got it back after World War II, but then gave it to the new People's Republic of China in 1956. So all the adventure was still for naught. Peter the Great envisioned Russia as a great maritime power, but none of his successors have ever been able to live up to that vision. The Russian Tsars of the 19th century got so desperate for a warm water port that would be safe from the Royal Navy that they started to look for prospects in the Persian Gulf or even on the Indian Ocean. So the competition with Britain, known as the Great Game, began. Russia didn't win it. For all its gains, right up to the present day, Russia is still a landlocked country if its adversaries want it to be. There's no need to look too far back in time for an example of how dangerous this could be for Russia's security. The Nazis made rapid progress indeed when they invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. The United States agreed to supply the Soviets under the Lend-Lease Act shortly afterward, but there was a huge problem. How would the goods actually get there? Murmansk? Nazi U-boats would make that route difficult and dangerous. Plus, Hitler occupied Norway. The Black Sea route? Double no. Greece was under Axis occupation. Plus, the Nazis had taken Crimea and wouldn't lose it until 1944. Vladivostok, or some other area along the Russian Pacific coast? That would mean dealing with the Imperial Japanese Navy at a time when Tokyo was dominant in the region. There was only one choice. The ships would land at ports in the Persian Gulf and then move through the Persian Corridor in Iran. And even that took something out of a parody movie to achieve: a joint invasion by Britain and the Soviet Union. The government there was too sympathetic to the Axis powers before that. Fortunately, the invasion worked. The American supplies got to Russia after going halfway around the world, and the Nazis were finally thrown back. Russia could, in theory, build a strong navy to counter these geographical weaknesses, but there's a problem there. You might have expected that by now. On paper, Russia's navy is one of the strongest in the world, but go under the hood and you'll see the challenge it faces. All of Russia's big ships, its lone aircraft carrier, 4 cruisers, and 10 destroyers are over 30 years old. Even Russia's submarine fleet is aging. The newer ships that are coming into service tend to be lighter frigates or corvettes. They have less range and aren't as capable in combat. In other words, Russia's navy is becoming less able to secure its maritime trade and make up for its geographical weaknesses. And it's all because of another fact of geography that you're familiar with now. Peter the Great's desire to make Russia a great naval power didn't erase the problem of its wide-open borders, with potentially hostile states to both west and east. Having a world-class military is an expensive business, especially when it comes to a navy. That's why historically, most states have had to choose whether they will spend resources on being a land power or whether to be a naval power. Well, that's sort of a misstatement. Usually, geography makes the choice for them. As an island, Britain didn't need to spend as much money on its army. Investing in the navy was the way for it to defend itself. It was also a fantastically good way to make itself the world's dominant empire. For Russia, the opposite is true. With such indefensible borders, it needs to spend much more money on maintaining an army capable of covering so much ground. All of Russia's moments of crisis came on land, not at sea. For Moscow, sea power is a luxury, and one that's becoming increasingly unaffordable. So, is there any way out for Russia? Can it possibly find a way to get its fantastic resources to hungry world markets in a way that its foreign rivals can't interfere with? There might be. For Russia, global warming is a very, very good thing. In 2018, Russia and China signed a $9.5 billion investment agreement to develop infrastructure. It sounds standard, but there was something peculiar about it. The only specifically named priority in the Russian press release was the Northern Sea Route. This route, which you might also know of as the Northeast Passage, spans the distance between Murmansk and Vladivostok. It has a lot of advantages to it. Remember that ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal in 2021? It cost the world economy $400 million an hour. A well-developed Northern Sea Route would avoid all of that. Instead of voyaging around Eurasia through choke points like the Strait of Malacca and the Suez Canal, they could go around the Russian coast. There are many advantages to this. It would save a lot of time and money. A typical journey, say from Tokyo to Hamburg, takes 48 days along the Suez Canal route. The same journey on the Northern Sea Route would only take 35 days. People have hoped to save time through Arctic shipping routes since the 16th century, but now things are finally looking up, almost literally. In 2010, a total of 41,000 tons of cargo passed through the Northern Sea Route. By 2019, the number increased almost 7 times to 285,000. That's partially because of more icebreakers, but Moscow is hoping there'll be a rarer sight on the seas soon. The scientific models are converging, and they're predicting something that hasn't happened in 125,000 years. The Arctic Ocean could be ice-free in summertime by 2050. Bolder predictions say it could happen as early as the 2030s, and that could be great news for Russia. Sure, development along the Northern Sea Route has so far been more of an object of hype than something that's actually happened. China remains interested, but there's been little going on in the way of concrete projects. Russia's invasion of Ukraine set those development plans back. Even so, we can expect more concrete investments this century. There's just too much to gain, and Russia would be the biggest winner. Imagine ships all over the world stopping on Russia's coast to do business. But does it truly free Russia of its geographical curse? That's debatable. A couple of years ago, some of Russia's ultra-nationalist military bloggers talked about getting Alaska back. The chatter came in response to a new law that Putin put into place. It doled out funds for the search, registration, and legal protection of Russian property abroad, including territories from the former Empire and Soviet Union. Putin didn't reclaim Alaska, but critics questioned what protection was supposed to mean. That word was a common rhetorical tactic used in Russia's historical expansion. With the Arctic ice melting, there would be reason to want it back. The distance between Russian and American territory across the Bering Strait is only 55 miles 88 kilometers at the narrowest points along the mainland. That would be a real problem for Russia's shipping in the open Arctic. There are 9 active US military bases in Alaska. Some of them host serious hardware like F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs. There's a facility for testing submarines too. Let's just say that if push came to shove, Russia's trade along the lucrative northern sea route still wouldn't be secure from foreign powers. In the 21st century, the Bering Strait could be yet another treacherous choke point that Russia desperately needs to find a solution for, but can't. So you see, when it comes to Russia, the celebrated Stalin biographer Stephen Kotkin put it best. Russia wants to stand out as a great power, but its capabilities have never matched its aspirations. Because no matter how vast their armies are, even the mightiest rulers can't conquer the map. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack.